There may be some new information today on who signed off on tough tactics to question terrorists. The Senate Intelligence Committee now says Vice President Dick Cheney and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice helped direct a small group of top Justice Department lawyers who wrote memos authorizing these harsh interrogation practices. Also, Rice gave the first verbal okay for the use of waterboarding in July 2002. Liz Cheney is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during the Bush administration and the daughter of the former Vice President Dick Cheney. Liz, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Did the former Vice President Dick Cheney, was he the prime mover behind directing this small group of Justice Department lawyers to come up with an authorization for these harsh tactics?
That's actually not what the document says that you're referring to. There's absolutely no question that this was a program that was widely approved and supported within the administration. I think there's no secret here that the National Security Council reviewed the program. The National Security Council ensured that it had legal approval before going forward with these techniques. But I want to go back to one thing we just heard the Attorney General say, Nora, which I found very troubling. He said that he had not seen the memos or any memos talking about the effectiveness of this program. And I think it's very important for people to ask the question, had the President, before President Obama made the decision to release the tactics and the techniques, had nobody reviewed the effectiveness of the program? Had his Attorney General and the President himself looked at whether, in fact, these programs had gained intelligence that was critical for the security of the nation?
Well, Liz, we'll get to that argument in a minute about the means justify the ends, whether torture justifies.
Well, it wasn't torture, Nora, so that's not the right way to lay out the argument.
Okay.
Everything that was done in this program, as has been laid out and described before, are tactics that our own people go through in SEER training and that our own people have gone through for many years. So it's really does a fundamental disservice to those professionals who are conducting this very effective program and to those people who approved the program in order to keep this nation safe and prevented attacks through the program to call it torture.
Liz, the CIA on its own after 2005 stopped waterboarding on its own. The U.S. prosecuted people for waterboarding after World War II. So to suggest that there's a consensus out there that waterboarding is not torture is not in fact accurate.
No, I think it is accurate. There were 3 people who were waterboarded, and 2 of those people are people who gave us incredibly important and useful information that saved American lives after they were waterboarded, both Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abu Zubaydah. And I would just refer your viewers to the really important op-ed piece that Mike Hayden and Attorney General Mukasey wrote, laying out why this program worked, why it was effective, and what damage has now been done to our national security by releasing the tactics.
Well, the current director of the National Intelligence, Admiral Dennis Blair, has said this about those particular memos. He says this, quote, "The information gained from these techniques was valuable in some instances, but there is no way of knowing whether the same information could have been obtained through other means." We have a full screen of this. No, I want to put this full screen up because this is very important. Could we please get that up on the screen?
It is important,
the bottom line is that these techniques have hurt our image around the world.
Nora,
the current intelligence director says that the damage that has done has far outweighed any information that was gleaned. And in fact, there is a disagreement about whether other tactics other than waterboarding could have gotten valuable information.
Nora, I'm sure you know that actually the first statement that DNI Blair put out internally acknowledged the incredible effectiveness of these programs and acknowledged that very important intelligence had been gained, and that it was only after the White House got a hold of that statement, edited the statement, censored it, I would say, and put it out publicly, that his language changed. So I think this is another instance where people need to take a very close look at the fact that you've had 4 former CIA directors talk about how effective this program is and why these memos should not have been released. And the fact that DNI Blair changed his assessment of the program should raise some questions in people's minds.
I want to get back to, again, and we can debate this, but I want to get back to specifically what role the Vice President had in directing lawyers to authorize these memos. Was it from the Vice President's office, Dick Cheney, who said to those men, John Yoo, Jay Bybee, we need to come up with a way to interrogate these al-Qaeda suspects after 9/11? Why doesn't he own up to the fact that he was the prime mover behind that?
Nora, there was no direction of lawyers from the Vice President. That's not how this process worked. And I think that you can look at exactly how the process worked, which is the CIA said, we've got Abu Zubaydah, and we think he's got important information that further attacks are imminent, and therefore we need to know what we can do. And the National Security Council met and discussed this. This is actually all laid out in Senator Rockefeller's timeline, which doesn't say what you're alleging that it says, which makes clear that the questions that were laid out to OLC were what's possible and when. And if you've read the memos, in fact, that were released, you'll see that they were very, very careful in laying out exactly what could be done and for exactly how long.
Well, let me put that up on the screen, because we do have that, and that's the first full screen I was going to get to, which is that Cheney and Rice signed off on these interrogation techniques. It's the very first graphic. Justice Department
Nora, what you're
lawyers
doing is reading
who wrote
a headline.
memos.
But Nora, you're reading a headline from an AP story or a McClatchy story. That's not what the document itself says. Now, I think it's very important, however, to be clear.
The Senate Intelligence Committee lays out that in those initial meetings were the Vice President, the National Security Advisor, that Powell and Defense Secretary Rumsfeld were not in those initial meetings. So if those were that small group of people, why won't you say that the Vice President was one of the prime movers?
Nora,
we've got to put these tactics together.
Look, there's absolutely no question but that the Vice President of the United States supported this program, as did the National Security Advisor, as did the Secretary of State, as did the Attorney General, as did the entire National Security Council. There is nobody who has been clearer about being out there saying this was a good program, this saved American lives, than the Vice President. So there's nothing about owning up here, because this was a good program and people are very proud of what we've accomplished. Now, setting aside that, what you're doing is reading headlines and talking about direction of lawyers, which is a very different thing, and there's no assertion that that's what went on. The lawyers' opinions were sought in order to make sure that the program that the CIA ran stayed within the law, and the lawyers did a very responsible and professional job of laying out exactly what were the limits of how far we could go, and that is precisely what makes it so damaging that these memos have now been released.
Listen to yourself, Liz. How far we could go.
That's right.
How far we could go with these detainees. I mean, how far could we torture them in order to get information?
For how many minutes you could ask certain kinds of questions?
I want to back out. I want to back up and get it out of the way. I know it is important, and that's why
it is an important point. It's a very important point.
The Geneva Conventions were established, Liz,
Nora,
so there is nothing to protect our men and women in the military, so that America would be a beacon in the world, so that when our men and women are captured overseas, that they would not be tortured.
Okay.
We would never want our people to.
Are you going to give me a chance to answer your question?
Yeah, let me just finish my point.
I get your point, Nora, but the point
now that the world hears that America no longer cares
about not what the world is hearing, Nora.
And that
first of all,
if it gets valuable information, then okay, we're for it.
Nora, that may be what you're saying, but that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that there were a series of tactics, a series of techniques that had all been done to our own people. We did not torture our own people. These techniques are not torture. The memos laid out.
Did we torture other people?
No,
you just said we did not torture our own people.
Therefore, the tactics are not torture. We did not torture. The memos laid out the extent of exactly how far we could go before it would become torture, because it was very important that we not cross that line into torture. As General Hayden and Attorney General Mukasey laid out, the problem is that now we've said to our enemies, look, this is exactly how far we're going to go. So our enemies, who we know read this stuff online, will now train to be able to withstand that. Now, setting that aside, this argument about the Geneva Conventions in terms of this idea that somehow Al-Qaeda abides by the Geneva Conventions. If Al-Qaeda captures an American, they cut his head off. So I think it's very important for us to sort of take a step back from the emotion of this and say we needed to be able to get evidence about imminent attacks. We knew these guys had information. The information that was provided saved American lives, and the techniques were not torture. And I think it's important for the American people to be able to see the entire argument laid out.